So I think what they did was they said to the Taliban, you can have the country. We won't evacuate the Afghans. We won't blow up your civilian airport. In exchange, you will allow Americans to leave, when they've got passports and green cards and whatnot. And you're going to keep an eye on Iran. We'll give you all of our weapons, by the way, to help you. And keep, allow contractors, and let's do business, and let's keep things going.
Kim Iversen, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for being on. I appreciate it. I actually think that you may be the first guest who I've ever had on the show who shares the same birthday as me. So that's,
what? We have the same birthday?
Yep, March 28th, right?
Wow, yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
We're the best, right? At least all Aries think that. We all have this thing where if somebody tells you you're the best, it feels really good, right?
Well, again, I really do appreciate you being on the show. I followed you for a while now. I think I actually probably became familiar with you in regards to Tulsi Gabbard's campaign and seeing you cover her campaign. But I was curious about your career before that. What got you interested in media, or just how did you start out?
Well, I was a radio talk show host for a long time. So I'd been in the media space, but just not on camera. So I had actually started my radio career right out of college. I did college radio, then went into interned at a major radio station, and then kind of worked my way up the chain in the radio world, getting weekend shows on air, and then moving to kind of sidekick on a morning show, to then getting my own morning show, to then getting my own nationally syndicated show. And then another nationally syndicated show. So I had done that for a long time, for about 12 or maybe 13 or so years, and then wanted to get out of radio. I just really didn't feel like there was, with radio, I just didn't know where the industry was going. I still don't know where that industry is going. And I just felt like I was young enough that it was time to make a transition out of that, what could potentially become a dinosaur, sort of like the way of print newspaper. So I was really worried about that, and I decided that I wanted to move to something different, like digital, or even a second career completely that had nothing to do with media at all. So I played around with that. I left my radio show, played around with a variety of different things like writing. I wrote for a couple of websites, and I was doing a variety of things, and ultimately everything always just came back to people wanting me to do podcasting. Like every company that I kind of worked for would say, yeah, but you're this radio person, so can you help us with a podcast? And that so I ended up not being able to get away with being on air. And ultimately the companies that I was writing for happened to be political. So I was doing these political podcasts for them, and doing a lot of research into politics, of course, because I was writing. And as I was doing a lot of research, I realized, wow, I don't really agree with all of the mainstream news organizations that I thought I agreed with, right? So when I was doing my other life that wasn't politics, I would consume main media just like anybody else. I would watch CNN. I would read New York Times. I would, read Vox or Politico or something, and found myself when I would start researching that I didn't really agree with them much at all. And finally got the courage to launch my own YouTube show, because the parameters that I was within for the companies that I was working with, the political companies, my viewpoints as I started to evolve them didn't fit into their views. And so I ultimately realized I had to part ways and start my own YouTube channel. And it was really scary, because I wasn't sure if anybody else would share my views of the world being, unorthodox and not really fitting into any of the left-right paradigms. And so launched that YouTube show in January of 2019. And so then here I am.
So I think that folks who maybe hadn't even heard of you the last few years know of you now, because you've been co-hosting Rising on the Hill. And I'm just wondering, what that experience was like. How did they reach out to you? What did they say? And just what were your thoughts when you accepted that position?
Well, I reached out to them. So, I know Crystal and Sagar, I'd been a fan of the show when they were on and thought that they did a great job. I didn't always agree with them, and I would say as such on my own show, but I really enjoyed them. I thought that I think that they still, that they have fantastic chemistry with one another, and they put on a great show. So I was a fan of the show. They left. Obviously, that was a big shock. I saw, I would still tune in to the show here and there, and I would see kind of the rotating cast of hosts that they were having, and that they were clearly trying people out. So coming from a radio world, I've never really done that style of television, and I thought that would be really interesting and fun and a learning experience. So I reached out to them, to their executive producer, and said, hey, while you guys are having all these guest hosts, I would like to come guest host. And they said, okay, let's talk. And so they chatted with me for about like a few weeks or a month. They wanted to do their due diligence. They researched me, watched a lot of my videos, kind of tried to figure out who I was, what I was thinking, what I was all about. And then they said, okay, let's try you out. Come on and guest co-host. And I've now been like permanently guest co-hosting, but it is still like I'm not hired. It's not a situation where any of us are hired on yet to host that show. The Hill recently sold, so a lot of things are in flux, and it's not that we're necessarily in flux. It's just that the company being sold, there's new management coming in. They're trying to get the lay of the land and feel things out and figure out what's going on. And so at this point, I'm like a permanent guest host until otherwise notified. So each day I just figure is my last day. I always keep thinking today's going to be the day that they're like, we've had enough of you, Kim, and you're crazy. Your views are not mainstream enough for us, or, you're too radical or whatever it is. And so you're too independent and we got to cut ties. But actually, it's been the opposite. They've been really I really thought that I would be censored. I was worried about that. I really thought that they would tell me what I can and cannot say. And actually, it has not been that way at all. If anything, it's been the other way around, where I've told them, guys, we can't talk about that subject on YouTube. It's in their community guidelines that we're not allowed to talk about it. And they'd be like, what? We can't? I say, no, unless you want the show to get a warning, or this video to be removed, we can't talk about this particular XYZ thing. So if anything,
do you know if that has been happening at all? Because
yes.
Again, it's a big corporation, and kind of the perception as more, as an independent outlet is that, these big companies, because they sort of, work hand in hand with YouTube, they can kind of get away with more. Do you know if The Hill has been censored at all?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know if The Hill has been censored at all, but I do know that they do have to work within the parameters of YouTube. So they do still have to color within the lines of what YouTube has set out. They're not immune to that. And they do try to stay within those community guidelines. They do have, they have more correspondence with YouTube than somebody like myself. I never got one of those YouTube, they give you somebody, a coordinator or something. And at one point they were going to give me a coordinator, I suppose, but then the pandemic hit. My views on the pandemic were not popular with YouTube. I think they were popular with the audience. They just weren't popular with the corporate YouTube people. And so they put a halt on giving me a person. But I know that The Hill has that person. And so they're able to communicate with them and find out what they can and cannot say and things like that. But no, they're not immune to censorship. I mean, you look at all of these other mainstream outlets and they do get hit, if Twitter is able to take the president of the United States down, they censored Sky News. YouTube, I believe, recently censored Sky News. They prevented them from posting for a week. Obviously, New York Post gets hit. A lot of outlets get hit. So no one's really immune. Maybe CNN, Fox, and MSNBC might be immune. I'm not sure.
I mean, even like CBS news articles that I posted on my personal Facebook page, they'll get flagged by Facebook or get like that disclaimer, which is pretty funny. But yeah, I mean, just in regards to The Hill, again, it's a little odd to me just because we've seen so many folks who've been kind of, gently pressured out of their jobs. I'm thinking of Matt Taibbi at Rolling Stone, Jimmy Dore at TYT. There's probably Glenn Greenwald at The Intercept. You've kind of seen this happen again and again, and these sort of outsider outlets trying to become a little more acceptable and forcing these independent voices out. And it seems, honestly, a little strange to me that the Hill would reach out to someone like yourself who has all these unorthodox views. Just why do you think that is? What was their thinking in bringing you aboard?
Well, the old company, so I don't know about the new company, and it very well could be the case that they say, hey, Cam, you're just too unorthodox for us and you got to go. That's possible with the new guys. The old company, however, they really, I believed that they censored. I thought for sure that they were telling Crystal and Sagar even what to say. And they assured me that that just was not the case and that they do not. The old owner was, he would even say, he's like, yeah, it's corporate media. I'm establishment. He's like, I suppose, but I don't want, I just want you to be you, say what you think. Just give me a heads up if you're going to rip one of my advertisers apart so I know not to place their ads on the video that day. He's like, that's all I ask. And they held true to that. I mean, we went after Chevron on the show, Frito-Lay. There have been a few big companies that we have said things against, about some of their behavior and whatnot. And the only thing that the corporate people, at the company have asked for is, hey, we've got to at least ask the company for a statement. We're going to tell them that we're doing this story and they need to, if they want to give us a statement, they can. And some of them have given us statements and others have not. And we read the statement and that's it. And I think that's fair enough. Right. But yeah, they really they were worried about me. I'm not going to lie. They took a while to put me on as a host. They were nervous. They said as much. They would tell me that they were worried about the fact that I do get censored a lot on Facebook and on YouTube. Not as much on YouTube, but definitely a lot on Facebook. Mm. And that was a concern of theirs. However, in them expressing their concerns, they said, they were like, we're just a little worried, but, they never then said, can you not say XYZ? Can you not touch XYZ subject? They never said that to me. They were just like, we're just a little nervous, but they let me loose. And, now they egg it on. Now they egg it on even more. They're like, yeah, keep up with that. Whatever it is you're doing, just if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Well, it does work, right? I mean, you just got 1 million views on one of your videos, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't think my views when it came to the pandemic were ever radical, really. I don't think my views were ever really all that different from a lot of people. I just think they were censored views and people weren't allowed to hear them. And my channel was severely, obviously throttled. And now it's clear it was throttled because I was getting these same views, by the way, before and at the very beginning of the pandemic. I had videos of my own on my own channel hit 1.2 million and regularly was getting views of 500, 600,000 on videos. And normally regular videos were getting 100 to 200,000 views. And so that shifted suddenly, like out of nowhere, suddenly I went from getting 15 to 20,000 subscribers a month to 0, not 1 subscriber. Suddenly, for almost an entire year, they didn't let me gain a single subscriber. So obviously they were doing something to me. Obviously they'd put a block on my channel. The minute I joined The Hill, which is a channel that's not censored, that doesn't have that same throttling on it on the algorithm, suddenly my videos are doing great again. So I don't think my views were, because one thing that people would say to me when my views took a tank during the pandemic, they'd say, well, see, because what you're thinking isn't popular. And it validated the people that didn't share my viewpoint. And the people that did share my viewpoint, it would make them feel like, oh, I guess we're alone on an island, we're all by ourselves, when in reality, I don't think that was true.
Well, I think most people know that they're being censored too, right? Like it's one thing when you're kind of an influencer and you're being shadow banned or your channel is being throttled, but when everyone is having things that they say getting flagged by Facebook constantly, then I think most people kind of understand the dynamics of what's happening here and the social control that Silicon Valley is trying to exert.
Yeah, I don't think people. I think there are quite a few people who know. But I think that there's a lot of people who are like, well, it's because you were spreading disinformation. And I think they just go along with that and say, well, that's what you get. You were spreading disinformation.
Mm.
I mean, obviously now we're a year and a half or longer now, a year and a half into the pandemic. And I think now views are shifting. So I think people that thought a certain way a year and a half ago are changing their minds now. And
well, I think it's always kind of changing, right? Like, I think originally it was about like masks or the lockdown, but now it's about the vaccine and ivermectin. I mean, that's been the big thing like the last month is ivermectin, and you people are taking horse dewormer and like that whole meme.
Right.
And I know that's something that you've covered too, and I believe that's what the video that you had hit 1 million views was. So
that was a natural immunity. It was on natural immunity versus the vaccines, how they're not even recognizing natural immunity as a real thing. They're just like, nope, it doesn't matter if you had it or not. You got to get the vaccine. And it's like, we don't do that with any other disease.
Right.
But we are with this one,
So, I mean, in covering this story, and maybe just especially lately with some of the topics that have come up, what do you think has been the biggest misconceptions about COVID, about the vaccine, or about ivermectin?
The biggest misconception about COVID has been that we could get rid of the virus. So this thinking that if we just do X, Y, Z, and if everybody just did X, Y, Z, this would go away. I think that's a huge misconception that a lot of people had that I think is obviously shifting. A lot of people are realizing it doesn't really matter what you do. It's here. I think the biggest misconception about ivermectin is that it's a horse drug. It's actually a drug that won the Nobel, the inventor or the person who discovered it won the Nobel Prize for that discovery because of what it does for humans. It's a human drug that they found also works in animals for various things, but it was one that was found for humans and used for humans and has been used for humans. So that whole that misconception that it's a horse drug, also that it also the misconception that it that there's a misconception that it works. People say it's false that it works against COVID. It is actually, the studies show are not false that it works. We have numerous case studies that show that it actually does have benefit against COVID. So is it a magic bullet, a cure? No. But is it better than nothing? Yeah. I mean, and that people deserve to know that. But of course, we're not getting there's no media attention onto that. It's just been all the eggs were put in the vaccine basket. And then now we've got all these people who've been double vaccinated and they're getting the virus, and they've done everything that they were told to do. And yet there's still no real early treatment for them that is being promoted or heavily researched. Ivermectin obviously being out of the patent for Merck. So they're not able to make any money off of it anymore. It's really, really cheap, so obviously they have a reason to want to discourage its use. And not saying that that's the best end all be all, and there could be something else that comes along that maybe Merck does manufacture something that ends up being better and more effective. I don't know, but we should be looking at anything and everything. We should be throwing everything at this virus that we can. And I think the biggest misconception about the vaccines is that they stop the spread, and they just don't. So we don't even know at this point. It's really unclear with the data how much they even slow the spread and for how long they slow the spread. That is really debated. So
I mean, that's the whole thing with these boosters now, right? It's almost out there now that we're going to need to start taking boosters every 6 months or whatever.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So it's unclear. It's still really unclear with the boosters. Israel's the first country to roll that out. It does look from just early data that the boosters are working to help lessen the severity of COVID for those who are, who catch it, who are elderly or who have hypertension or diabetes or, any of these other sort of comorbidities that make the outcome more potentially severe. It does seem like those boosters are helping with that. But we don't know for how long that'll last. We don't know if that'll last with a different variant. We don't know what we don't know anything about the side effects at all of taking a third. That was never studied in any clinical trial. You know, they tried to do like real quick impromptu clinical trials of like, okay, what will happen if we give people a third dose? But they don't have any data really on that besides short term. So when people are afraid of long term side effects with even just the first 2 doses, we really don't know anything when it comes to a third. So, you know, I think just the fact, thinking that it can stop the spread, then people will say, well, okay, Israel shows it wears off, but you at least have protection for 6 to 8 months, but not against spread. I mean, Iceland shows us that they inoculated the majority of their population June and July, and in August had the largest spike of cases they've ever seen during the pandemic. So we're seeing that over and over and over again. We're not seeing the opposite. So I would believe data, you know, I always believe the data, and we're just simply not seeing any data right now that shows once you mass vaccinate, the spread goes away. We haven't seen a single instance of that. In fact, we've only seen the opposite now over a dozen times in a dozen highly inoculated countries. So I think it's really safe to say at this point that that's just not the case. At first they said, well, it's because they took the Chinese vaccine, right? Because it was Chile that had the first mass inoculation and then mass wave of COVID after that. And they say, well, they took that crappy Chinese vaccine. And then it was like, well, you can't say that. You can't say that about Seychelles. You can't say that about Israel. You can't say that, you know, a bunch of countries after, you know, country after country after country just couldn't say that about anymore. So we don't have a lot of good data on like Moderna, for example, or Johnson & Johnson. So it's still yet to be seen with those. But AstraZeneca, we have a good example with the UK. They pretty much exclusively took AstraZeneca. We see that it still causes massive spread. They're saying, well, I guess we just have to live with it. Israel's now kind of saying, I guess we're going to have to. Israel tried to say we're going to have to live with it. And their population was like, no. They didn't like that their politicians were saying, I think it's time for us to realize we have to live with this. And so now they're like going on and talking about 4th booster doses. Their COVID czar just came out Saturday saying, get ready for a 4th.
So do you know if in other countries there's been the level of propaganda that we're seeing in the US? Because what I find particularly disconcerting is not just that information is being suppressed or censored or flagged, but that we're seeing false news stories. So like with Rolling Stone, for example, when they were saying that people weren't being able to get treated for gunshot wounds because people were taking ivermectin and being treated for that. Yeah. And then they had to issue a retraction. And also the image that they used for that story was actually an image of people lining up not to be treated for gunshot wounds, but to get the COVID vaccine. So it just, you know, it seems as though there's just so much censorship, so much just lies that are happening on this. Is that the case in other countries as well?
Not from what I'm seeing. So from what I'm, you know, I do take the time to read the news publications coming out of other countries, and I even translate them, you know, using Google Translate. I'll get the actual news from these various other areas. And I am not seeing this level of propaganda, maybe in Australia and Canada, maybe even in the UK, but only those countries. And it seems that the other countries are not, maybe Germany, if I had to be fair, maybe France. So I think there's some that there's like a small group of Western countries that I think are maybe fueling more fear and propaganda for either monetary interest. I mean, I would say, I suspect here in the United States that a lot of that is largely based on our pharmaceutical industry and the fact that our government has been bought off by big money interests for a really long time. But in other countries, I would say
the news networks too. I mean, I remember watching the CBS nightly news, and every commercial was a big pharma
drug ad. Yeah, big pharma, and that's funny because people always say, oh, Fox is like anti-vax. And I'm like, have you been watching? Clearly you don't watch Fox if you're just saying that Fox is anti-vax. They're not anti-vax at all. They can't be. One of their largest advertisers is pharmaceutical companies. I mean, they're making a boatload off of pharma. So they're not anti-vax at all on Fox. It just, that's the narrative that people are being told. And CNN is spewing that, and MSNBC is spewing that. And then you watch Fox, and they're like, get the vaccine. We've got the vaccine. Everybody here has been vaccinated. You know,
right.
So I do think that our media is very bought off. Our government is very bought off. Other countries, I'm not seeing as much of that, particularly the Scandinavian countries. They're operating, Iceland gives amazing amounts of data. If you go to their website, their government website, Iceland is so refreshingly transparent. I mean, they tell you what percentage of their people have the vaccine and are unvaccinated to who's caught the virus. It's the graphs and the charts are there, and they're showing that it was pretty much equal, that the percentage of the population that was vaccinated to unvaccinated, it was equal amounts who caught the virus. So they had 70% of their cases were vaccinated and 30% were unvaccinated. Well, that's the population percentage of who's vaccinated and who's unvaccinated. They also show you the data from week by week, the percentage of those people and the spread. And when you look at their chart, what's really interesting is their first week or two of spread, this wave, fully vaccinated people were the ones spreading them. No unvaccinated people were in the cases. So that kind of goes against this whole narrative that we have here in the United States of it's the unvaccinated fault. They're the reason for the spread, and it's because they won't get vaccinated that the spread is happening. And then when you go look at Iceland's data, their first week or two of this wave, they don't have any undocumented cases, unvaccinated documented cases in that beginning bit. So Iceland now has they're singing a different song, and they're saying, look, we hoped that this vaccine would work. It's not working as we hoped. It does work to limit severity. The elderly, those who have comorbidities, should be taking this. It's helping them. And we're going to have to figure out a different path forward, as we move on. And, I think we're seeing that come. And Denmark is now saying Sweden was right. They had a better path. We're just going to have to learn to live with this. And we're going to have to try our best to live alongside the virus and try to mitigate damage as much as possible while still living our lives, because this thing's not going away. But other than the Scandinavian countries, yeah. And of course, Asia has a whole different view. They're not even mass vaccinating that quickly. So they have a very different viewpoint. They're really slow to vaccinate over there. Japan was fast because they were being forced to for the Olympics. But other than that, and China says that they're fast, but I don't know about China's data on any of it. I don't trust any of China's data.
Well, one thing that I wanted to ask you about is really, the division that's happening over these issues, not just in American society, but particularly on the left, because I think that there are a lot of people on the left who are naturally inclined to not trust the government, not trust the media, not trust big pharma. I'm talking about the far left, the actual left.
Right. I was going to say the mainstream left is more about big government, and
yeah.
You usually find the Republicans that are more distrustful of big government.
Right, but I guess I mean like the
progressive left, yeah.
The anti-imperialist,
right.
And the left that didn't buy into Russiagate. However, I am seeing a big split there, where a lot of those folks are either supportive of the vaccine. I think it's kind of an inclination to let's be progressive, let's get the vax, let's get rid of this virus, and let's move on so we can keep fighting for a higher minimum wage and for labor rights and to end the wars. Let's just not fight about this. Let's just get the vaccine and move on. And then again, I see a lot of people who are suspicious of the government, of media, of big pharma. And it seems as though it really is a rift that's dividing this group. And again, I think that, again, there is a misconception about what I even mean when I say the left, because they're so divided over and over again, right? Like,
yeah, right.
The Democratic Party is divided in some ways. The Bernie Sanders movement was kind of divided after that. I don't know if you followed the whole kind of rivalry recently between TYT and Jimmy Dore and Aaron Mate.
Yep. Oh yeah. And how can you miss it?
And then you get to the point here where I don't know. We may see people like Jimmy Dore and Aaron Mate disagreeing over the vaccine and ivermectin. So, do you think that this is something that could be overcome? Do you think that there are any areas of agreements there where people can come together and say, "Well, I'm not for mandatory vaccination," or is it really just going to be like this existential issue like Russiagate that's just going to further divide people?
Yeah, unfortunately, I think it's going to be an existential issue because I think it really has shown the authoritarian, it's the difference, the divide now being the authoritarian left and the more libertarian left, almost, if you want to call it that. So, like kind of the social libertarians, I would say, amongst the left versus, yeah, the authoritarian, what I would call authoritarian. I don't know what they would call themselves, but I certainly view it as authoritarian. So I think that that divide is, to me, more important than Russiagate, actually. So I would much rather partner up with somebody who believes in Russiagate, for example, and nod my head along with them if I had to choose and say, yeah, okay, fine, Russia did it. Russia did everything, right? I would much rather go along with the Russiagator on that than I would with somebody who wants all of these mandates and authoritarianism. I think that's so much more fundamentally dangerous for our society, for our freedoms, that I just cannot, in any good conscience, I don't care if I agree with them on every other thing. I think the most damaging thing that someone could do is exert that sort of authoritarian control over our lives, because I think that that eats away at the fabric of our freedom. And that has got to, I mean, and it sucks, right? Because I want to fight alongside them for Medicare for all. But then at the same time, a lot of us that have been fighting for Medicare for all sit here and think, yeah, but now, hold on, if we got Medicare for all, would they then force us into these different medical mandates because it's all under one, government insurance? And a lot of us have that concern suddenly that we didn't before. And I'm hearing a lot of people who were fierce fighters for Medicare for all suddenly take a step back and say, I don't know now. I don't know, because if these people are going to be in control, I don't know about that. That's not the Medicare for all we were signing up for. So, I do think that this authoritarianism is going to be the thing that divides the most. And we see this also on the right. We see they come out in their authoritarian way when it comes to like a woman's right to choose. I'm fiercely pro-choice in all ways. I'm pro-choice for women's right to choose. I'm pro-choice for your right to decide whether or not you want a vaccine or to medicate. I'm pro-choice. And so it puts myself in this, and there's others like me. I think the libertarians on the right have that same issue with people on their side of the aisle, where, they've got people wanting to put all these limits on marijuana and women's right to choose and all of these things. And libertarians are like, why are we even involved in it? Like gay marriage, libertarians are always like, gay marriage, fine, do what you want. Smoke weed, fine, do what you want. Women's right to choose, fine, do what you want, So I think we're sort of, I don't, it'll be interesting, but we're clearly creating a libertarian left, if that makes sense. So there's now these kind of two factions. You've got, and, when you look at the right on their side of the aisle, they do have other factions as well. Not only do they have the libertarian right, but they also have factions of the right that are, they do have people that are not libertarian at all, really, that are now like the populist right. And we're seeing that also on the left. And there's a lot of crossover in both of these. But I don't know with the left how willing they'll be to work together. Whereas the right, they have a lot of infighting and they'll really take each other to task. I mean, those guys, they mean business on the right. They will call out the power structures. They will go against their speaker. They will really call each other to the carpet, and they mean it. The left doesn't do that as much. So it'll be interesting to see with these new sort of created enclaves inside the left, if there will be enough power in those groups to call out the power structures on the left. The Democratic.
You know what the interesting thing is, though, is that it seems as though on the right, the populist right they're able to effectively label their leadership as traitors if they go against the grain. But on the left, if you go against the Democratic Party and against the Democratic Party leadership, then you are the traitor,
right?
And
right.
You're the one who's secretly, a right winger or whatever.
Right.
So it's a really funny dynamic how that works, how the Democratic Party, how liberals are just able to bring people into the fold.
Yeah, Republicans don't, when they do that, They don't really as much call each other like Russian assets. Like the left will be like, "Oh, you're working for Russia," or you're paid off by dictators, or all the other nonsense that the Democrats kind of do to one another, where they say, "Oh, you're a secret right winger. You're actually alt right." Or you're, a dictator, or, apologist, or you're a Russian asset. They do all of that. I don't really see, maybe, I mean, they might do that on the right. I don't spend enough time in their world for me to know what they do in there, but I have spent some time with a bunch of Republicans, and I've actually been really amazed at how much infighting there actually is inside of their party. They don't really show it as much as the left does. And they don't use it against one another so personally, it seems.
Mm.
So I find that really interesting. I mean, we do see it a bit on the right, like they are taking Liz Cheney down, right? So we're seeing them, the populist right, go after the establishment right, and they are calling them, kind of closet Democrats, or just join them. So they are booting some people out, but they don't seem to do it as much as the left does it. The left seems to do it in mass, almost like you can all go. Republicans will just kick one out one by one. Like Adam Kinzinger, you're out of here. Liz Cheney, you're out of here.
Well, let me ask you for your opinion on this, actually, because this is something I want to talk to you about. So again, I became aware of you in the context of Tulsi Gabbard's campaign, and you were one of these journalists who was covering her campaign, as I was. I was very disillusioned when Tulsi Gabbard endorsed Joe Biden. I ended up burning my Tulsi Gabbard shirt.
Although I may not agree with the vice president on every issue, I know that he has a good heart. And he's motivated by his love for our country and the American people. I'm confident that he will lead our country guided by the spirit of aloha, respect, and compassion, and thus help heal the divisiveness that has been tearing our country apart. So today, I'm suspending my presidential campaign and offering my full support to Vice President Joe Biden in his quest to bring our country together.
Do you think I was kind of wrong to react that way? Or do you think that, when you do kind of cross that line and enable the establishment in that kind of way, that you kind of prove that you're not part of the libertarian or populist left?
I always kind of wonder if she regrets her own choice. I don't know, but I wonder if she regrets her own saying, okay, I now endorse Joe Biden. A guy that wrote the Patriot Act, fundamentally, a guy that's always been pretty much a war hawk. And, I wonder, because even with this whole like facade of we're ending the war in Afghanistan, no, it's just that the Democratic Party, under the direction of Hillary Clinton, actually have always wanted to shift the way wars were fought into a new direction of over the horizon counterterrorism, a lot of high tech methodology of fighting wars. They want to remove the boots from the ground. They know that that's not popular. People don't want that. And there's a way for them to continue on this warfare in the military industrial complex without having actual human beings on the ground. So I don't really buy like Joe Biden and his whole like, oh yeah, suddenly he's like a dove. Right. Who's like going to go around ending wars, like, Yeah,
you have Kyle Kulinski and the Gravel teens, the folks at the Gravel Institute, saying that Joe Biden is the greatest president of the 21st century.
Give me a break. I mean, once again, and it's a lot of the same people that were saying, go trust big pharma and, this pandemic and everybody, it's, I think in a year or so, they're going to be eating their words a bit on that, because I don't think we're going to, you cannot tell me that a tiger suddenly changed their stripes, and everybody that he put in his cabinet who were a bunch of war hawks from West Exec advisors, suddenly they're not interested in warfare. That is not true. And they've said as much. I mean, they've said we're just moving war to a different way, droning. I mean, so suddenly these guys are okay with drones. Okay, great. No boots on the ground. Ending the actual invasion or occupation or whatever you want to call it, but let's drone them, or let's go and target somebody else.
just to take a step back, I mean, that was something that Tulsi Gabbard was also in favor of. You know, she didn't mind droning. So, you know, I kind of wonder in retrospect. I was very enthusiastic about her campaign. I thought that she was by far, well, maybe with the exception of Mike Gravel, she was the best Democrat running. However, you know, in endorsing Joe Biden and not just endorsing him, but doing it how she did it, when she did it, saying that he was going to embody the spirit of aloha. Like that just seemed like such a slap in the face to all of her supporters. And again, that's why I took offense to it. And I just don't know. Did you feel the same way, or did you kind of have the perspective that she needed to do this?
No, I mean, I definitely was against that. I definitely did not think she needed to endorse Joe Biden. I think she should have just, why say anything at all? You know, I think it's just better not to give an endorsement at all. Just say nothing. You know, like if you don't want to upset the power structures, I suppose, of the Democratic Party, then say nothing. You know, that's better than coming out and saying Joe's the guy. So I mean, I was really disappointed in that, just like I think many of the other Tulsi supporters. And there were things I definitely disagreed with Tulsi on. I always say I agreed with her 85% of the time. But that was way more than I agreed with anyone else. And I don't need to agree with somebody 100% of the time in order to support them. So, yeah, there were some other aspects that, you know, potentially I wasn't all that in favor of. I understand the concept of droning, you know, being better than troops on the ground, because I guess your less lives are lost. I mean, when you look at like Vietnam compared to even Afghanistan, we had much, you know, fewer deaths because we now fight high-tech warfare. On our side, we had a lot fewer deaths, but we still do a whole lot of damage to the other side. And,
right, and actually, Medea Benjamin wrote a book about this too, and it's drone warfare, killing by remote control. And her argument is that these drone pilots, they're essentially just playing a video game when they're slaughtering these children.
Right.
So you know, there may be. You know, there may be something to saying having a soldier there, they may not be as willing to just slaughter civilians in the same way.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Look, I think if we are going to wage war, then we need to wage fair war. You know, you've got to give. I mean, to me, it's got to be a fair war, I suppose. If you're going to go take someone's life, then yeah, you should have to look them in the eye before you do it, right? I mean, so as long as they're going to give us the same courtesy. If they're not, you know, and if they're going to drone us, then I guess you know, I don't know. I mean,
well, the Taliban has drones now.
Right. Yeah. Don't they? They have everything. But yeah, I mean, war is ugly and horrible, and I hope we don't ever have to. And most of the wars that we engage in, we don't need to be engaging in at all. I think we really should only go to war if we're invaded or if one of our allies is invaded. It's got to be there's like an actual breach of borders and an invasion. But right now we go to war over interests. Oh, we got to protect our interests, our monetary interests, our corporate interests.
Right. The petrodollar.
Yeah.
Well, just on the subject of Afghanistan, I am curious because I did see your reporting talking about how there was a leaked phone call between Joe Biden and the former Afghan president. And he mentioned in the call that the U.S. seemed to not be attacking the Taliban or not bombing them as they were taking over the country, which seems odd. And again, just the whole way that the Afghan regime fell and how quickly the Taliban took over the country. Do you think that, you know, the CIA and the military industrial complex, they essentially wanted the Taliban to take over? Or, you know, was this again, I don't think it's Joe Biden being a dove, right? Like it seems as though this had to be permissible on some level.
Yeah, I think that I mean, now in hindsight, I mean, I was very, very floored and appalled by the withdrawal. I still think that there should be resignations handed in over it. I think we could have withdrawn on the exact same day. This is not about extending war. It's not, you know, the stupid either or that they give us of, well, either we continue endless war in Afghanistan or we get out and we leave all these civilians behind. To me, there was absolutely no either or there. We extended from May 1st to the end of August or even September 11th. Why? I thought it was so that we could get civilians out and that we could evacuate get rid of our equipment or disarm our equipment or blow it up or whatever we were going to do. and get civilians out and high-risk Afghans out. That's why I thought Joe Biden had extended from May 1st to the end of August. I think we could have gotten out on that exact same day, just taking our civilians with us, and that to me was a huge, huge scandal that I think, however, looking now with a little bit more hindsight, I think one of the reasons why the administration did not take all the civilians and did not evacuate the Afghans was because it's looking more and more like there was a secret deal done with the Taliban. And my guess is it was done through Pakistan, that we were talking to Pakistan, Pakistan was talking to the Taliban, and ultimately we allowed the takeover of the country, supported by Pakistan, by the Taliban. And part of that negotiation, it seems, I'm speculating completely, but it's looking more and more like, as we connect dots, that the Taliban were the ones that asked not to evacuate the Afghans, that they didn't want a brain drain. They wanted the people to stay. They wanted them to help build the country. And it's looking more and more like, from the inside sources I'm getting from Afghanistan, from the people that are on the ground there, from just reports that we're hearing, from just watching and seeing and connecting dots and seeing what makes sense, that the Taliban were given Afghanistan, and that part of that concession too of us leaving and the Taliban still working with U.S. contractors and pipelines and interests for the U.S., that we would, for one, that they would work with us to continue containing Iran. That two, because I don't think we would ever give that up. I mean, come on. We've spent all this time mean mugging and surrounding Iran. You think suddenly one day we're just going to say, okay, we're going to give up a country that surrounds the nation that we're keeping an eagle eye on? I don't think so. So I think what they did was they said to the Taliban, you can have the country. We won't evacuate the Afghans. We won't blow up your civilian airport. In exchange, you will allow Americans to leave, when they've got passports and green cards and whatnot. And you're going to keep an eye on Iran. We'll give you all of our weapons, by the way, to help you, and allow contractors, and let's do business, and let's keep things going. And we basically, I think now it's looking like, and again, I'm speculating, that we have inserted a new puppet regime, and it's still with Western interests in mind. The Taliban. And it was better for everybody to keep that deal quiet. The Taliban could not, under any circumstances, after fighting the Western powers, saying we want the government that's there, they're propped up by the West, we want them out of there. The Taliban couldn't suddenly say, oh, but we're going to do a deal with them, and we're going to do business with the Americans, and we're going to be friendly with the Americans. We're going to take that job. They couldn't suddenly step in and do that and still keep up the narrative that they've been keeping up for the last 40 years in the country. And we couldn't suddenly say, by the way, those people we were calling terrorists all this time, now they're our allies. Now we're friends. And we're leaving our weapons behind and our civilians too, because no big deal. We're friends. Nobody was willing to say that. And that to me also is a huge scandal. Maybe the Americans were safe after all behind enemy lines, because maybe they weren't actually behind enemy lines. Right? I mean, so, but that, the government works for us. That military is ours. We deserve answers, and we deserve the truth. And the fact that they think they can hide all of this from the American people, just imagine their disdain for us, the people, we the people, how low they must think of us, that they don't clue us in on these things, that we're left speculating.
I think there are many, many examples of that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. But that's, I think that's actually what is looking more and more like what has actually happened. The reports on the ground in Afghanistan I was at, and now I even saw this trending like yesterday on Twitter, finally, but I'd been hearing about this from the whole time, was all of these Afghans were writing me saying, Pakistan did this. This was Pakistan. Why isn't the U.S. sanctioning Pakistan? These were Pakistani soldiers, that the Taliban was filled with Pakistani soldiers. So, and then of course, the U.S. has a relationship that we do have with Pakistan. So I don't know, putting it all together, it's looking more and more like, yeah, I think we did a deal with the Taliban through Pakistan.
Well, Kim, I know that we're running short on time. I did want to ask you a patron question. And all of my patrons, for just $1 a month, they can submit questions to guests. And I really do appreciate support from patrons, because episodes like this get demonetized. So I had a question from.
I'm sorry that interviewing me gets you demonetized.
No, it's like every other episode. It's
terrible.
But yeah, I have a question from Todd Adams. He asks, do you think that Nick Brana's People's Party is worth the effort?
Yeah, I think it's worth the effort. I think every attempt at a third party is worth the effort. Because even at least if you don't create a third party that actually becomes viable, you create a caucus that becomes powerful potentially. So it's worth it for sure. My thinking, and always kind of the issue I've always taken with the People's Party was that it was, to me, just another Bernie Sanders movement. It wasn't going to actually create a third party. You can't really create a third party unless you're going to bring in people from both sides of the aisle, because you have to be able to take from both sides in order to be powerful enough. If you're only draining support from one side of the aisle, then you do become, the Green Party that they point out and say, well, it's all your fault. We didn't win because you guys voted for some third party candidate, and, look what you've done. But if you're able to take from both the right and the left and create this kind of formidable space, Teddy Roosevelt was able to do that to some degree. I think, well, he was able to really do that kind of more to the Republican Party. But if you can do that, then you really can truly make a third party that actually becomes a potentially viable third party. There's still a lot of problems with creating a third party, because you got to do it on a state by state level. You got to get on the ballot. Like, there's a lot of issues that make it nearly impossible. Plus the Electoral College makes it nearly impossible. But you do create in your effort a very powerful caucus. So if Nick Brana and the People's Party can create a really, truly powerful caucus inside of the Democratic Party, even that's worth it. I just don't think it obviously at that point doesn't turn into a third party.
I don't know. I think I've just seen, like, so many times with the Bernie Sanders movement, with the Justice Democrats, it seems as though you can't really influence the Democratic Party, like they're immune to it. And even if you elect people like AOC, they just get co-opted.
Right.
So yeah. It seems as though, from an electoral, I mean, maybe the solution isn't even electoral politics. Maybe it's, having a general strike. But from the standpoint of electoral politics, I don't know if you can really do anything inside of these two parties. I think that you need a third party.
I don't know. The Republicans, look what's happened to their party. I mean, the Democratic Party has just historically had the establishment has had a very, very firm grip on the Democratic Party. And they have been able to be the least democratic, actually, of the two parties, from superdelegates to the whole Hubert Humphrey scandal, where he ran in like 2 primaries total, if any, and ended up with the nomination that caused the riots in Chicago. So the Democratic Party has, even just they're undermining Bernie Sanders. And, who knows what else they've done. I don't put anything past the Democratic Party personally. I don't put anything past them. So you look at them, and the establishment has been really, really entrenched. The Republican Party, not as much. Seems like there's a big chink in the armor on the Republican side, to the point where Donald Trump could get through, much to their, they were like shocked. They didn't want it. But you have to give them some credit that democracy won on that side of the aisle, and it's not working on the Democratic side. And I think on the Republican side, we're seeing a shift happening over there. And the establishment on that side is trying their best to hold a firm grip, but they're realizing they're losing it. And so what instead is happening is their establishment is trying to morph, right? So you see Mitch McConnell doing his best to he's like, well, I guess this is the party of Trump, even though he hates Trump's guts, and it's obvious. But he doesn't know what else to do. And we're just not seeing that at all on the Democratic side of the aisle. They just aren't budging at all. So I don't know. I think the Republican side can still be co-opted by the people. I do see that happening. Democratic side, real tough. And I don't know how we break through that with what they've got going on with, the way they run their elections. And then now you've got even Democrats excusing it, right? They say, well, it's a private corporation, so they can do what they want, and it's like,
right.
So I don't know.
my last question for you, and I appreciate you doing this interview on Labor Day, and sorry
Yeah.
if I took away from any
No,
Labor
it's all
Day
right.
celebrations.
Well, we're gonna have a barbecue a little later, so.
Cool. Yeah, actually, and it's weird. Today is also the day that the unemployment benefits for COVID expires, which is pretty insane that it's expiring on Labor Day, that you'd actually have it line up that way. You also have the eviction moratorium that
Right.
expired. And also in February, the student loan payments are set to resume. It just seems as though you have all of these different relief efforts that are really going to hit the middle class and working class people. And it seems as though going into next November's elections, you're going to have a lot of people saying, actually things were better under Trump. I was doing better economically, and Democrats have just screwed me over time and time again
Right.
by letting all of these things expire. So just what are your thoughts on that? Why are Democrats letting that happen? Why are they not keeping these in place at least until after next November's election?
Well, because I do think that we are seeing that people, businesses are having a difficult time finding workers. We're seeing, and that in and of itself hinders the economy. And so I think they're worried about more of a ripple effect of, if the businesses can't find workers and they can't keep their doors open, then, or even open them at all because they can't find workers, then, we're going to have like this other problem. And, I have a real, I have a sort of my feelings on the relief and them expiring are kind of mixed, because I have to say that I've just seen and this is anecdotal, I totally understand that, but I have a lot of friends that live in a lot of different neighborhoods in Los Angeles that are from very different socioeconomic classes, from Watts, to Beverly Hills. And I could tell you that a lot of people are taking advantage of the situation right now, that they're not really hard up. Even in the inner city neighborhoods, my friends that live in those neighborhoods that interact with the people are saying that they're not actually hearing any, and these are people that are community organizers. They're on the ground. They're talking to people. They're not just like average people that are, they're actually engaged in politics, in community. And they're saying that they're not hearing of a lot of need where people really, if they don't get these moratoriums, oh no, they're actually finding the opposite. And I'm seeing the same thing just in my neighborhood as well, that more people are taking advantage of the situation. There are people who need to be evicted. There are people that need to be evicted. They're committing crimes. They are, they're making the place uninhabitable for their neighbors. They need to go, and they're not able to be kicked out. People that normally would be evicted are not able to be evicted because of the moratoriums. And that's a challenge. I know a lot of business owners that say they're having to pay people under the table in order to entice them in, because those people don't want to give up their unemployment benefits. They're wanting both, and they're even paying them, way more. I think but on the flip side of this, what I like about all these benefits is that it is forcing employers to up their game, right? They have to offer people more money. They have to offer them more benefits. It's a great bargaining chip for all of these people who are being enticed back into work. And now, to me, is the time to use that bargaining chip. Say, hey, I'll come back, but here's the deal. I want this many, this is how much I want now. This is what I need in order to survive in this city. So I think that there's a real bargaining chip available to people that they should have been using during the summer when everybody was scrambling for workers. And I don't know. I think this has got to be a state by state issue. I think that there's a lot of money out there for people for rent relief that people can easily, they can go take advantage of. I don't know how easy, but the people I know who've needed it have been able to get it. So it must be somewhat, available to people, because I haven't had anybody say they've been denied that have needed it. And it's even questionable whether they actually needed it. So I don't know. I think there's a lot. I do think that, and I hate to say this because I was one of those people that I was with Bernie when Republicans were saying, oh, they're going to give them more money than what they were even making. And Bernie's like, so what? Like, we're in a pandemic. Oh, they're going to make $300 extra a month. Like, get over it. And I was with Bernie on that. But I do have to say that anecdotally, in the the places I've been, from Florida to Idaho to California, people are taking advantage of it. So I understand the need to maybe end it.
Yeah, I don't know. I just I think generally speaking, there's so many people just like struggling to get by, even in pre-pandemic, right? Like just wages are low, rents are high, and I think too another part of this too is that rents have the potential to skyrocket at this point. And if you remove again, not only if you're removing those unemployment benefits, but also the student loan bubble, I think is really could have some dramatic effects on the economy. If you have 45 million people who essentially have to start making another mortgage payment in February, I mean, that could crash various sectors of the economy.
Right. Well, and those are problems that are pre-pandemic for sure. Student loans are a huge issue in my household. You don't even want to know how much we pay every month in student loans. It's definitely more than most people's mortgage. So we feel that burden very much so in this house. It's keeping us from buying a house because we have a mortgage payment to student loans.
Right.
So we feel, that is something that absolutely needs to be addressed. That has nothing to do with the pandemic or even relief. It is really nice to have the moratorium on the student loans to be able to get ahead, or to, when it comes to paying down the principal or not paying at all if you can't. Rent has to be dealt with. And these are issues that have to be dealt with that are not going to be solved, I don't think, with just I think, although the moratorium on student loans, I can see that being a thing we keep in place because the student loan issue, again, is pre-pandemic and needs to be solved. Evictions, however, like I said, there's just people committing crime. I mean, and they're not able to be evicted, and they're causing issues for their neighborhoods, for their landlords.
If they were causing crime, wouldn't they be arrested for committing crimes?
Yeah, but they still they're not evicted. I mean, they can be arrested, but then what? You can't evict them. So you can't get rid of the problem. I mean, if the person then is in jail and then they're not paying their rent because they're gone, you can't evict them. I mean, there's a lot of things like that are going on in my building. And one thing that's been very, very frustrating for me during this pandemic is that we have the entire floor above me is being rented out as Airbnbs. And we've just had a rotating every week groups. And I'm talking, there's 20 apartments above me. I would say 13 to 14 of the 20 are Airbnbs. So we're talking every week, all these new people coming in and out of these elevators. I was having my dad come here to stay for the holidays. We were sheltering in place. I worry about him and his health. He's older. I am trying to keep the people in my life protected from the pandemic. And how can I do that when all these people that are flying in from who knows where are in my building and we're circulating air around in the place? And that was a big concern for myself, and there was no way to evict. I mean, we did everything. There was no way to get rid of them, and because of the moratorium. So I don't know. I mean, I think it's been, we're not hearing a lot of stories of people who are, the millions that they're talking about that are going to be evicted. Look, 3 million people annually get evicted anyway for just bad behavior. And that was before the pandemic. So when we're talking about who's potentially at risk of being evicted, a lot of it is those same people that would normally be evicted. And then on top of that, there are other groups of people that potentially would be evicted if they have bad landlords. But again, the states should be stepping in. They've got all the money to do the rent relief. There's no shortage of the cash. It's not being used. So we've got the money to pay that. So I just don't think there's a real urgent necessity. The money has been given, and now it's up to the states to distribute it. And so to me, it's a state by state problem, and the governors are the ones that are going to have to deal with it. And the demise of them politically, if they end up with a bunch of people on the street that were evicted, families that were evicted because they couldn't pay their rent and they couldn't get access to the money that the state was given. But it was like $40 billion.
we really want to get to that point, though? I mean, you don't want to see families on the streets, right?
It's not, look, at this point, honestly, it isn't our problem. It's the state's problems. They were given the money. The people have access to this money. The money is there. So this isn't like the federal government did everything the federal government could do. The federal government gave billions and billions of rent money to the states. And what, 3 billion of it has been given, or 4 billion out of the 40. So there's a lot of money to be given for rent relief, and the states need to do that. I don't know what else we can do because the money's been given. I would understand a moratorium and continuing that on. There has to be a logical reason for this. We can't just do it to do it. The logical reason to do it is to say, because the government hasn't stepped in to give these people any relief. Well, the government has. So now there's no reason for it. So now it comes to, the people have to go and work with their states and figure out what they need to do to get access to that money, but there's plenty of it.
So I guess just going back to my original question, just from like a purely political standpoint, like political calculus, it seems strange to me that the Democratic Party would let all of these things expire. And, just going along with, I know probably for the wrong reasons, there was a lot of backlash about Afghanistan and Joe Biden's approval rating sinking for that. Do you think that collectively all these things really could lead to the Democrats just having a terrible November next year?
Oh, yeah, they're going to lose the midterms for sure. Republicans are going to take over control of everything, I would suspect. And I think most of it has to do with the authoritarian nature of the Democratic Party right now when it comes to the pandemic. Really, and we're seeing, and that's why I think one of the big reasons why, obviously, that's why Gavin Newsom's being recalled. And I think even Cuomo, they blamed it on, the women, but it had nothing. Look, people were mad. They were mad about the nursing home deaths. They were mad about being shut down endlessly in New York. People were flocking out of New York to Florida. New Yorkers are mad at Cuomo. And so they found another reason to get rid of him, because if they got rid of him because of the pandemic, then a lot of, the dominoes start falling, because a lot of people did the same thing as Cuomo in a lot of the same ways. And so that would just be a ripple effect that they didn't want to deal with. So they just went ahead and said, well, you got to go because of the women. But look at Newsom, he's got another problem on his hands here in California. I think what we're seeing, that is going to happen absolutely in the midterms. And it's largely because they just have really mismanaged, I think, the pandemic and the response to the pandemic. People are finally fed up, and they're saying, you're the ones that have locked us down for so long, and now you want to mandate all these things. And yet, then you've got all these small business owners that are hit twice. You have to understand, and this is why I'm also like, it's time to end all of these relief packages. There's jobs out there. I'm not willing to sacrifice these mom and pop shops twice. Are you kidding me? We already sunk them during the pandemic, keeping them shut down. And now we're going to sink them again by not giving them access to employees, because they can't, because people are unwilling to come, because even I know people that they're making less off of unemployment than they would be working, but they don't want to work, so they're just like, no, I'm enjoying my time. I'm doing arts and crafts, and like, hey, more power to them. I understand. I love to spend time with my family too. And I think we do need to re-gear, how we do our work weeks here in this country. And we really need to rethink that. But it is.
I think that's part of this too, Kim, is that, this was such a, profound thing to happen to society globally, that I think a lot of people are kind of taking inventory for how we even organize. And, again, there's definitely negative connotations to that, right, with all these different authoritarian measures that they're wanting to implement, and big business and big government are definitely trying to profit off of what's happened. But I think people on a personal level too are thinking, should I be paying student loans? Should I be paying a mortgage on my future just because I went to school? Should I be paying this astronomical rent just to have a place to live? Are these wages really high enough? Are they getting me by? So I think that a lot of people are taking inventory. And there's also this story as well of a lot of people are considering quitting their job soon. It's called the Great Resignation. So I think, that's just something that's happening on a more profound level, where people are kind of thinking, maybe there's a better, more equitable way to organize our society.
I don't know if they're really thinking necessarily that. I don't think they're thinking on that philosophical of a level, but I think they're thinking on a personal level, and they're personally thinking, I don't want to commute as much. I don't want to pay as much as rent, and I don't want to work as many hours. And part of my, hourly work week goes to commuting. And then I'm struggling every month trying to figure out how I'm going to pay this crazy rent. I mean, I don't know if they're thinking on a big philosophical level on it, but I do think that they're personally thinking, I'd rather move inland, or to somewhere else, and work remotely because I can. And so I think we're seeing a lot of that movement for sure. I think there's going to be a lot more of that as people do take that personal inventory and say, my life is worth more than this. I don't want to just work all the time. I want to do other things. I want to have work-life balance. So I think we're going to see a lot more of that work-life balance for sure. But, how we get there is, we are this attitude, and this is what I want to caution people on the left about, is saying, okay, well, let's continue all of these moratoriums. Let's continue the benefits. Let's keep people from working because why should they have to slave away? Let's keep people, look, you're just marching us way faster into big business and automation because look, mom and pop shops are folding left and right. They can't sustain. They don't have the workers. They already got hit hard by the pandemic. And now you've got the big companies like Amazon, and they're taking over, and they're not going to give jobs. Their whole goal is to move to automation. So we're like racing our way to this point faster by saying, I'm no longer valuable. So if you remove yourself from the equation, then a company is going to have to pivot, right? They're going to have no choice. If they find that their workers aren't coming back to work, they have to figure out how to make do on half the staff. Well, they will figure that out. And then they won't have a job, and that's going to be the way forward, is that all of these companies, it's just like Zoom, right? We saw all of these like Skype and Zoom and everything because they had to out of necessity. Suddenly they were like, shoot, we got to like amp this up because everyone's using our platform. We got to offer more services. So businesses are going to do the same thing. When they can't find the workers, they're going to find a solution that some other company is going to offer them. That's going to be automation. And we're racing our way to it. So, we need to have human value and that, and human worth. And we could just say, well, all right, then I guess I'll just collect UBI. But I don't know how happy of a society we're actually going to be like that. I mean, I do think we're going to have something like that as we race towards automation. I don't know. There's no real way to stop it. But like climate change, we can certainly try to slow it down. So that's my big concern, is I worry that we are eradicating human value from the workforce completely and faster. So I don't know what we do, but
and I agree. I think that's been a threat since the beginning. I think that big tech from the beginning of this pandemic definitely saw it as an opportunity to push AI and push automation. I don't know. Are you familiar with Whitney Webb?
Yeah.
I think that she speaks to this really well. You guys should have her on Rising. I don't know if you select guests or anything, but I think that she would be a great guest to have on there for several different reasons. But yeah, I mean. I can see where, that's something that we need to be on guard against. I think about how working class people have been struggling in this country for so long, right?
Right.
And
in some areas of the country, not all areas. So we're really kind of looking at it more from a big city perspective. But there are a lot of really affordable cities in this country. They're just not cities people think to move to.
Well, Kim, I know we went way longer than I said we would. Again, I really do appreciate you being on the show, especially on Labor Day.
Yeah, no problem.
For folks out there who would like to follow you and stay up to date with you, how can they do that?
Well, I've got my channel, Kim Iversen Show, on YouTube. And of course, you can see me on the Hill. I'm also there. Right now, I feel like I'm everywhere. So.
Cool. Well, again, Kim, I really do appreciate your time today, and hopefully I can have you back at some point in the future.
Yeah, thank you.